Some people date the history of modern harness racing to 1940 when George Morton Levy started Roosevelt Raceway, and others date it to 1950 when the gentleman who's with me revolutionized the sport, basically starting at Yonkers Raceway, but he is known wherever harness horses are raced. Welcome, Stanley Dancer.
Thank you, Stan. Pleasure to be here.
Stanley, of course, is a Hall of Fame trainer and driver and one of the greatest in the history of the sport. And what I was referring to with 1950 was when Stan broke the Indian file style of racing. Tell us a little bit about your debut. I understand you originally had trouble getting stalls.
Sure did, but you know, Stan, it was 40 years, June 11th, that I made my first start at Roosevelt Raceway, and there was an article done not so long ago that was sent to me, and it was all about how I left out of there, and was an all-go-out style, but the race was won by a horse I drove called Eddie Boise, and it said the top track leading driver, Frank Savert, was in the race, involved in a wreck, but anyway, the race was 2:13.
2:13 the first one. Well, that's as good a time as any to ask you about speed, Stanley. With horses now, 2-year-olds going where they're going, I noticed your 2-year-old Pied Piper won last week out at Scioto Downs in 1:57.4 in his third start, I think. What's the story of speed in the sport?
Well, Stan, I really don't know. I was talking to my son Ronnie the other night, and I said, gee whiz, he was saying how fast, and like Saturday night here at the Meadowlands, every race beat 55 and 2, and only one of them was 55 in a fraction, the other was 54 in a fraction, 51, 52. And I said, I bet you in time to come, that would be 149 and 148 or 150. There would be no more 51s, 52s, 53s. I really believe it.
Delvin Miller, of course, has said he thinks that one of these days a 2-year-old will be the world champion. Do you think that will happen?
Oh, I think that's quite possible. Right now, just said about Pied Piper, 57.4 this time of year. Gee whiz, it's not that many years ago that'd been a world's record for any kind of a racetrack, along the 5/8. And people say, well, why? You know, it's very hard to say why, except that the style of racing and the equipment, the way they're bred, the tracks, but you don't see very many slow halves. I noticed the other night on the Jake Lobel race, it was over the half in 55 seconds.
Right.
The night I drove Belle Acton, which was one of the highlights of my career, was in 1955, and
when she was in Billy Houghton's state?
Right. Billy wanted me to go for the world's record with it if there was a chance, and it was a cold night, and I said, gee, I think we better concentrate on winning. But anyway, just before I left, he drove Batch and I drove Bell, and he said, Stanley, it would really make George happy if you could. I was there with a half in 4 and 2. And went a mile in 2 and 2. Last half 58 seconds. Well, today I wonder where she'd been if she'd been over the half in a minute or so.
Absolutely.
You just never know.
All the great horses you had, Neville Pride and the Super Bowl and Albatross and French Chef. Can you pick a favorite?
Oh, sure. Neville Pride, you know, I bought him when he was yearling running out in the Fattic in middle of July in 1966, and being the horse of the year, every year he raced, 67, 68, and 69, and you, among many, know how great he really was, and just the people today don't really know, but back then they sure did, and I know you remember, and he was just a super great horse, wore no weight, and great gait and great mannered. And of course, Albatross stood out of all my pacers. He was super.
So those are your 2 favorites?
Absolutely.
And this man has added so much to the history of this sport, to its legend and to its lore, that the sport is indebted to him forever, and we're happy to have you here again on the show from the Meadowlands.
Thank you, Stan. It's a pleasure to be back again.
Thanks, Stan Dancer, Hall of Famer.